Hi, my friends. So I thought this just might, this is really more for me that I'm doing this, but I thought some folks out there might find this interesting. And so as I go through it, I'll sort of ramble and share it. So I have before you, or before us, an array of Rider-Waite-Smith decks that over the years I have liked. And I've said this in a couple of recent videos. I have a reputation as someone who does not like the Rider-Waite-Smith deck or system, and that's not entirely the truth. I have some problems with it, but I have problems with pretty much every deck anyway. But this was, the Rider-Waite-Smith was my first love, and, I do return to it frequently, and I'm having sort of a moment of looking at different versions and comparing different versions and whatnot. So what prompted this video was really just the moment I came back from the Reader Studio. For some reason I took out the Albano Waite, which is the one in the middle there, and I started working with it. And then the Radiant Wise, which is the one just to the right of that, came out about that time, and I picked that up. And around the same time, I had also found on eBay the Tarot of A.E. Waite, which is not easy to get in the United States, because it's an A.G. Mueller deck. So that's this one. It's an A.G. Mueller deck, which is not available in the United States unless you manage to get it on eBay, which I did. So, and then, at around that same time, as I do from time to time, found on eBay a deck that I have wanted for a really long time, and that's this one. And this is the, it just says tarot cards here. So this is, I don't really know a whole lot about the history of this deck, but I know that this was originally a deck that was produced by University Press or University Books, and it's been a version of the deck that I've wanted for a long time. And honestly, because that's the one that Rachel Pollack referenced in 78 Degrees of Wisdom as being her first deck, and so I went on a hunt, almost a 20-year hunt for this, and I managed to find a reasonably priced edition of it. Now, I don't think, in fact, I know this is not a University Press printing because it says Carroll Publishing Group. There's no date on it. There's also no copyright. But I imagine this was picked up from University Press over the years, or I don't know how that worked, but this is sort of as far as I know, pre-US Games. And it's a really interesting edition, and it's also interesting because from what I've heard, and I don't know that this is 100% true, but that University, or sometimes called the Pink Unk edition, was what inspired the Albano Waite, Frankie Albano, to correct the colors in the University. And there are some really, these two are definitely the most sort of like shockingly vibrant. And then this last one was it was my very first indie deck, and this is the Carol Herzer deck that is still around. She's made some changes, I think, over the years to some certain things. Like in this version, the Queen, King, and Page are the signs of the zodiac, and the knights are the elements. And then there's a couple changes to the titles of the trumps, but other than that, it's the same. And then, so absent here is my very first deck, which was the original Rider-Waite Tarot pack, which I've shown a bunch of times, and it's not really the prettiest. But what I wanted to do is just sort of like take these 5 versions that I have always found really attractive and just look at them and compare them to one another. Now, these two really don't quite belong here because this is a complete and total recoloring, and as is this, and so they're not sort of in the history of Rider-Waite-Smith decks. They're not really in the same category as these might be. And even this one, I don't know sort of a whole lot about what its source was, but it does have some nods to older versions. It's really about these two, but just because these are other attractive Waite-Smith decks, I thought it would be fun to just look at them all at once together, and that's what I'm going to do. In terms of backs, the Albano weight has always been my favorite in a lot of ways, and I do like the Crackleback a lot, although I have to say the Crackleback looks better on video and in pictures than in person for some reason. It's one of those weird things. But this, obviously, part of the reason I wanted this deck was because of the back, this pink onk moment. But I've always liked the roses and lilies back. This coloration isn't my favorite, to be honest. And then this is just completely neutral. So this deck is a laminate deck. So it was printed on paper, in color print, painted over with a iridescent paint, and then laminated. But it's really, that's 18-year-old deck. It's definitely stood the test of time. So, this is really just going to be sort of a rambly, just like comparison of these different editions and what they look like and how they compare. And the real thing that I'm curious about is actually how the University and the Albano look together. And what are similar and what are different. But I thought, let's throw these others in the bunch too, because why not? And let's celebrate the beauty of Pamela Colman Smith's art. So I don't imagine saying a whole lot of anything revolutionary here, but the things that I'll say about these two are definitely the most sort of 60s, 70s color palette. They're arresting in a lot of ways. This Lo Scarabeo Radiant Wise Spirit has really nothing to do color-wise with the previous editions, and nor does this one. And it's sort of shocking in a way to see the Fool without a yellow sky. It's interesting because it's such an iconic image. In fact, I was watching a really terrible old horror movie the other day, and there was a big poster of the Fool up in the background. It was from the 70s, and I thought it was really interesting. So here's sort of an evolution of the Fool, and I will say that this version, which is the A.E. Miller Tarot of A.E. Waite, is probably the easiest on the eyes and likely the most attractive for someone who's sort of looking for an authentic coloration. Like many modern editions, it does not retain the original hand-drawn font. Which is, it's something that bugs me, honestly, because it's such an iconic part of the deck. I would wager that there are two reasons why this happens with the typography. One is because of copyright. They sort of, I would imagine, have to change as much about the deck to protect themselves. And because it's published in different languages, it makes it easier for them to publish different editions. But I sort of feel like in the I have French decks, I have German decks, etc., where the language is in English, and I'm totally capable of reading them, so I sort of wish we could leave it alone. On the other hand, I don't know, I just like the authenticity of this. So here's the Fool. These cards are so here's one thing about this deck. I am really excited to have this deck. The cardstock is so thin that it's almost like there's a part of me that wonders whether I should laminate it because I want to use it. I should probably also mention that this version of the Albano Waite is not a vintage edition. It's not one of the most recent editions. I think I got this back in like 2000. So this is what the box looked like at the time. It was printed in Belgium. So that's what this is. It's not a vintage Albano Waite. Whoops. And, I know why people are really sort of in search of the vintage, because there's some color things that have gone on over the years. But I do really like this edition despite its flaws. So here's the Magish. This coloration, I don't even know if you can see it on the camera, but it is so electric in a way. It just feels very 60s. Like the greens are very sort of blue-green, and the blue, this is a very blue deck, as you'll start to see. And one of the things that I have always found about a lot of editions of the Waite Smith is that I don't like all the yellow, and I don't like the aggressiveness of the yellow. You're going to find that this is a very aggressive blue, which is interesting. So there's the Magician. So we'll look at the High Priestess. See, already that electric blue is like, boom. So the High Priestess. So you can really see, I think, like, hopefully how pow that blue is. It's really an intense blue. Look at the Empress. The Empress is among Pam's version of the Empress is my favorite Empress of any Empress in any deck. And I just love this one so much. Now, in terms of like how these things were colored, it's not easy to tell. We know Albano painted them. I imagine this was digital. This was done by hand. This feels a lot like the Yellow Box edition, but a little clearer and more pristine and more detailed. This is a fairly yellow edition too, but it's a little bit easier on the eyes, and it's got this cross hatching that does the shading. So unlike the original Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot pack, which has the dots, this is sort of like a cross hatched thing. And even though the colors are subtle, you really can feel it. This is probably my least favorite version of the Empress of the bunch. It is a little muddy. The dress is a little gray, but you know, still a fan. This one is super cool because that blue, just like pow. And the greens in this deck are really just delicious. You know, they look like almost teal. So here we have the Emperor. This is a really striking addition of the Emperor to me for some reason. So look at those reds and the orange is like, pow, this is such an electric deck. It's like, it really does feel like a product of its time. So the Hierophant, never my favorite card in this particular deck. Carl Herzer in this version of this deck called it the Initiate. Lovers, like purples and blues, crazy. I love it. Really striking. This deck is so cool. It just vibrates. Like it's almost you know, it's not even almost, it's unnatural in its coloration, which is kind of great. And even looking at the Chariot, like the Albano is sort of so known for being garish, but the Chariot's actually a much subtler Chariot than the University Press one. Now, Carl Herzer in this edition made Strength 11, and 8 was Justice, which is the Marseille tradition. That doesn't really bother me one way or another, because I just read the way I read, and that's that. Look at the Electric Hermit moment. The Hermit, again, another of my favorite cards. The lines in that robe, again, just feel so iconic. And so, you know, so sort of brilliantly powerful. And it just, like that, when I see this version of the Hermit card, it just says tarot to me. The Wheel of Fortune is never my favorite card in any edition of the Waite-Smith, to be honest. I just do not like the art. And it's just never my favorite card. Justice. More electric blue in the Hanged Man. That's so cool. Carl Herzer called Death Transformation, which is not an uncommon title for modern iterations of tarot decks. I don't necessarily mind it being called death. I mean, it's a thing that exists, and you know, again, the Trumps are all metaphors of experiences in life, and so very rarely, I would say, is something literally, you know, when you draw the emperor, it doesn't mean you're becoming an emperor. If you draw the moon, it doesn't mean you're turning into a planet, you know, or a satellite. Pow. So Albano gave us this sort of like sloppy rainbow, which charms me. Like, it really, I think the thing about the Albano weight is that it charms me. There's something kind of innocent and naive about the coloration in it. You know, and what's interesting is that I read the way I read, and so here we have these different iterations of this deck. Rarely do changes in the colors, in the titles. Really, it doesn't really impact the way that I read, because I know the image, you know, so well, and I'm not necessarily the kind of reader who responds as much to color as other people do. Even Marseille readers have a relationship to color that I don't. And if you read Yoav Ben-Dav's book, a lot about the colors in the Marseille, that is not something really that impacts me much. I'm not the most visual reader in a way, and so when I am looking at the card, I'm really making associations and triggers, but I'm not necessarily as influenced by the color. And so what matters to me is that it's attractive in some way, or that it charms me in some way. And one of the many reasons why I stepped away from a lot of, I mean, there are a lot of reasons why I stepped away from reading with Rider-Waite-Smith over the years. One of them was just that I found a lot of the editions really ugly. You know, as much as I liked the line art, I was sort of always waiting for this edition, you know, and I feel like if this one had been the one that came out when I was starting out, I might not have gone deck buying crazy as I did, you know, almost immediately. But, you know, this is probably the most beautiful of the mass market, like, traditional Waite-Smith colorations. It's still a little yellow for me. It's still a little light. I like a richness in tone, which is obviously one reason why I like the Albano, but, and why I'm sort of charmed by the electric color in the university version. But, there's a lot of subtle shadings in this Tarot of A.E. Waite that I like a lot, and so I think it's a really good addition. I wish US Games would just work with AGM, and it seems like they had a relationship in the past, and I don't know what happened, and I'm sure there's things going on with copyright and whatever, but this is an edition I feel like US Games should be proud to have available of this deck, because sort of, again, this is, I mean, I don't work for them, I don't know what the hell's going on in their minds, but like, this is a really good mass market edition, and as like as the carriers of the banner of Pamela Colman Smith's legacy, you know, it's interesting to me that my preferred mass market editions of this deck are ones that are not produced by US Games. You know, like, I never went and got the Centennial, any version of the Centennial, because I didn't like the backs. It just, like, I wanted a Centennial edition that felt like it was from the century when it came out. And so I felt like, oh, it's just this different back, you know, that it doesn't have anything to do with any previous classic edition. And like, the crackle back is something that existed, you know, the roses and lilies existed. So I just sort of wanted something from that edition that it didn't give. And, you know, I feel like, yeah, I mean, I don't want to like shit on anybody, but I feel like, you know, this is the deck that launched 1,000 ships, as it were, and you know, I wish US Games would give it its due. I wish they'd come out, or work with AGM to make this the default edition. Like, I feel, something could be organized to do that. I don't know, whatever. Or at least make it available. I mean, the yellow box people are never going to not buy that. I mean, when bookstores used to exist, I remember on the counter at the front of like B. Dalton booksellers, like the little gravity feed thing, you just grabbed a Rider-Waite-Smith deck. At this point, I'm just looking and chatting and rambling just to sort of see the differences in coloration and whatnot. One thing that Albano does that I really like is the orange skies and the wands. Although it's not across the board, he doesn't do it in every card, but I do prefer orange to yellow. Yellow has never been my favorite color. So here we get into more of that, like, whoo, electric blue sky. Yes, 60s realness. Really subtle here, just really nice. And it's not to say that I don't respect what Stuart Kaplan and the US Games folks are doing. Like, I get it. And, everything's a matter of taste. I just feel like, I remember when I started reading back in like 1999, 2000 and thinking, like 2010 or 2009 will be the 100th anniversary of this deck. There should be some kind of rad historical reproduction of some kind, and we didn't. I mean, the cards, the face of the cards themselves, they're nice. Again, not my favorite coloration, but the backs I just really didn't like. So, and again, you can't please everybody, and nobody consults me, because why would they? Although if they did. It's funny to be looking at these images because I've looked at them thousands of times, and to just sort of like return to them and just look at them like a picture book for once is a really interesting experience. I have such vivid memories of the first time I looked at the Waite-Smith deck, my very first deck, and just the vivid and visceral reactions I had to the cards. It was so magical. It was such a cool experience. I remember falling in love with the Empress. I remember seeing the Death card for the first time and getting sort of chills because of it, and it's such a cool thing the first time you see tarot cards. This color is so ridiculous, and I love it though. You know what I mean? Like it's so crazy. It's like it's unlike anything, and they're normal colors. It's like they're the same colors that are in other editions, but it's like they are amped to the gods. And then suddenly we have a very subtle sky for the king. So now we move into cups. The quality of printing on this one, it reminds me a little bit of a comic book or like a magazine print. Like the way that the cards are shaded has a very sort of, I don't know the printing terms, to be honest, so I won't even pretend, but it does remind me of the quality of a comic book, which is probably one reason why people over the years have said that this deck feels like a comic book, because probably they saw this edition or a similar one and they saw that coloration, which oddly isn't all that different from the techniques that were used when the deck was originally published, because it's like a smattering of tiny dots that add shading and color to the color below it. I didn't choose these 5 and exclude others for any particular reason. These are just the ones that were very specifically Waite-Smith that are capturing my attention. There's a lot of worthy additions, so by showing these and not others, really the only thing I was doing was comparing decks that have been on my mind. There's so many good ones and modern adaptations that are a little bit more appropriate for modern life, but these are the ones that were out in front of me, and I really just wanted to see, turn the pages of the book a little bit and see how they compared together. And it's a fun thing for me. Who knows how long anyone will stay with me. This is probably my favorite version of this card. That rainbow actually really works kind of nice, as opposed to the one Temperance, the pink and blue tunic of the page. Working with Rider-Waite-Smith based decks or decks that are not Pip decks these days, I both allow the image to inform me and also resist it. So it's an interesting duality for me, and it's very two. There's a push and a pull. So there are times where, I'm reading with a Waite-Smith deck or a similar system, and I'm not even looking at the image at all, with the 3 of Swords, for example. And then there are other times where I do let it inform that. It's an interesting thing about being a reader, and I say a lot, get everything in your toolkit that you can fit, because you never know when you're going to need it. And when you get stuck, if you're looking at a card and you don't know what it's telling you, and you have numerology to pull on, or you're looking at a Pip card and it's like the number and the suit aren't making sense for you, you've got the memory of the Rider-Waite-Smith image to inform you. And what I really try to do is just accept that I've got all of this information in my intuitive brain, and when the cards are laid out, I try to listen to what message is coming through strongest and what makes sense in the context of the other cards. I said in a tips video recently that the cards are triggers for our brain, and they're really nothing more than that. Folks who have commented on my Pip videos, sort of resisting the idea of reading with Pip decks, they've said, well, without the images, you could just use playing cards, or you could just use nothing. You could use a pack of index cards with the name of the card written on it, and you could, because the associations of the cards are still with you. So yeah, if you're in a pinch and you're out with friends and they want a reading and all you have is a pen and some pieces of paper, you can make a tarot deck and do a reading by writing out the names of the cards, and doing that, because you'll remember the image, you'll remember the associations. If you use astrology, if you use Kabbalah, you have all of that with you. It doesn't go away, and so the cards are impulse triggers, are intuitive triggers that help you access your learned associations. And so it doesn't matter what system you use if you have a good foundation. Now, the nice thing about working with the Waite-Smith deck, of course, is that when you're starting out, you have very specific visual cues to guide you, So you have the 6 of Swords, and it suggests, there's a sadness to the card, there's a moodiness to it, there's a movement away. Swords tend to be very sad or anxious in this deck. And so you start to be able to tell a story the way that you would reading a picture book as a child. And that's fine. But, I would say that learning a Pip system is equally as easy, because all you have to do is know the meaning of each number and the meaning of each suit, and then put those things together. So it's not, no one way is the right way, but the more methods that you have at your disposal, the more tools you have to call on. And, like a toolbox, you don't need every tool for every job. You may be working on fixing a leaky faucet, you probably don't need a drill in that case, you know what I mean? But you have it in case something happens and you do need to use the drill. So, you know, if you're reading with a Waite-Smith deck, just because you have the numerological systems and the numbers may conflict with what you see in the cards, that's fine. You know, if you're reading the Eight of Swords as being stuck in your head, and or just being stuck in general or trapped, but you have the ability to get freed, which is a very traditional meaning for this card, you have that. But then if you're doing a reading and that's not making sense, but 8 as effort and work and swords as the mind may trigger something for you that wouldn't be there otherwise. And you just listen. You know, you look at the cards that are next to each other and in the context of the question, and you call on all of your resources and you dig through your toolbox and you pull out what is needed at that moment. And how do you know you're pulling out the right tool? You know if it fits, you know? You know that a Phillips head screwdriver is not going to work on a non-Phillips head screw. I don't know what the I don't know what the other kind of screw is. I just remember Phillips head. Does it even have a name? Like a flat screw? I don't even know. But you know what I mean? Like, you know it's not going to fit. So if you're doing a reading and you're like, maybe I should call on the numerology, and that doesn't work, then it's not the right tool for the job. But if the image isn't helping you and the numerology clicks, then that's the right thing for the right moment. You know, tarot knows all of the associations that you have for the cards, and so it trusts that you're going to call on those tools if you need it. But I don't, you know, I you know, like anyone else, when I'm talking about shit, I sometimes have an absolutist stance. You know, I'll say something like, I don't read Waite-Smith, or I don't like that. Like, of course, you know, of course I do. It's like, it's based on a system that's different than the one that I've developed over the years. And so the Suit of Swords in particular, that we've gone through is it's out of alignment with the way I've come to view the Suit of Swords. It makes sense if you understand the system that the Rider-Waite-Smith deck was based on, which was based on cartomancy. It was based on older, folksy traditions, mostly systems that were codified into text by Atea. They slap all these, you know, Lord of Dominion and Lord of Nod onto it to make it sound golden dawny and fancy, but that's just coming from playing card associations with the Suit of Spades as being about hardships and negativity. I mean, that's where those meanings came from. They did a very dangerous thing for free-thinking people, which was they also said, oh, the Suit of Swords is related to the element of air, and the element of air is associated with communication, mentality, intellect, etc. And you know, we can't unknow that, you know, and so we call on it when we need it. And so I don't love the 10 of Swords or the 9 of Swords or the 3 of Swords, as they're not flexible images. But, you know, I mean, just to pat myself on the back, like, I'm used to it, and I've become a good enough reader to work with or against the image and talk about it in a way that makes sense and not really sweat it. And there are times where I just want the visual joy of working with a Rider-Waite-Smith or similar system deck. And there are times where I enjoy the simplicity and the geometry and the history of a Marseille-style deck. And I love that I get to have both. And I love that both serve their purpose really well. And it was not, you know, it was not a difficult journey to learn. I mean, you could boil my book Tarot on Earth down into a few things I've just said. I mean, the reason that book is so intense is because what I really want you to do as part of working through Tarot on Earth is to internalize it so that you can call on it and you feel more confident. A lot of what Tarot on Earth is about, aside from reading with pip decks, is internalizing the lessons so that when you need them, they're there for you, so that you don't need to, like, reference notes or whatever. So it's partly a guide to reading with pip decks, but it's partly based on my career as an adult learning specialist, and how the only way you learn and retain information is that you assign value to it, and that you get into the sandbox and you play with it as much as you can. You work and you engage and you explore and you internalize and you make connections and associations that are clear to you and that excite you. It's so much easier to do that than to memorize someone else's ideas and someone else's thoughts. And that's how I learned to read tarot, was memorizing other people's ideas and other people's thoughts. But, in the years since, I've learned a lot about how the brain works. And one of the ways the brain works is that if you're actively engaged with something, you're more likely to remember it. So this is my favorite card in the Waite Smith deck. And the reason I'm stopping here is actually in 78 Degrees of Wisdom, Rachel Pollack talks about how this card, which in other editions does not have this, the character has a shadow on the right side of her face. Albano clearly copied that, and there's a little bit of a sense of that in this edition too. And it was one of those things where I'm not a very visual person, but in reading her book back then, and just sort of the attention to detail was so incredible to me that you would notice like a shadow on the face. And there are times where even someone as sort of visually stunted as I am will find that really potent, or something like that will really jump out at me and go like, oh yeah, you're turning away from the light, but that doesn't always happen. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't, but again, that's just another tool in the toolbox. It's just another piece of the toolkit. So now, we're winding down. Obviously, we're getting into the last court of Pentacles here. In a way, my favorite court for some reason. The Knight of Pentacles has always been one of my favorite cards in tarot. And again, Pam Coleman Smith's Knight of Pentacles is often my favorite. There's something very sort of like earnest to me about this character in this deck, and I'm always really drawn to him for some reason. And the Queen and the King of Pentacles I've always found really beautiful too. I just love all the greenery and fauna around them. This is the hard part about working on a flat, so like a wooden surface, is I have a hard time picking up the last cards. I love the King of Pentacles. He just sort of seems like he's becoming the earth. So that's it. That's just a little look at these decks, and just a little opportunity for me to get in and look at them side by side and explore them. And hopefully it was fun listening to me ramble and look at the cards and talk about tarot generally and different methods of reading. I don't know when I'm going to get to post this video, because I'm doing this now and I'm realizing usually I would go and edit it, but my Mac is in the Genius Bar's hands because it's having its keyboard and logic board replaced, so boo. But I may try to do it on my iPad until I get frustrated. So anywho, there we go. Thank you, Pamela Coleman Smith, for your brilliant artwork. Copied many, many times by many, many folks. One of the, probably, I think, though tarot may be a niche market, I think this is one of the most influential works of art, the whole deck, in the history of art. I can't think of art that has been copied and influenced more artists than this one. So, bravo. That is that. Hope you're doing well. Hope to talk to you soon.